we had what was known as accelerated reader as kind of guiding the books that you would pick and that you would be assessed on with a quiz that nobody really knew the answers to.
You should see my face right now.
Yeah, totally.
You should see
totally
how he's cringing.
No, absolutely.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Hey, before we begin, we just want to mention that we love your feedback, so please continue to drop us a line and say hello. Tell us where you're listening in the world. Share any ideas or notice or wonders, things we can do to make our show better. We just love to hear from you, so please send feedback to hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Abigail DeGroot, I believe you are responsible for bringing the topic today, and I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart, so why don't you share with us?
Yeah, well, we're going to talk a little bit today about reading in classrooms, specifically, I think, older students reading in classrooms. Dave and I both saw the same tweet, I believe, in the last couple of days that just wondered, does free reading have a place in middle school, high school?
Yeah.
What does that look like? How would that impact students' reading abilities, even their mental health, right? Just to have space and time in their day to read. And having taught high school students, I also know it is not a popular activity, right?
That's interesting. Say more about that.
There are students who really loved to read who I interacted with.
Sure.
The vast majority did not fall into that category. And our friend Gwen, who teaches with us in this department, and we teach adolescent and children's literature, and we always start our semester here at Dort with having students write a little bit about their reading history, and specifically their history in school with reading and their reading experiences in school. And we're actually writing a grant proposal on it right now to study the connection between students' school experiences with reading and their attitude toward reading as college students or as adults. And we feel like there's a strong connection there between their often negative experiences with reading in school and their attitude towards reading as college students.
Abby, what's your hypothesis as to, or your inkling as to why so many students, I think most, you correct me if I'm wrong, when they're younger, love, enjoy, appreciate reading, and then at some point despise, don't like, reject. The thought of reading is just absolutely, like, it just sends a shiver up your spine. Like, what happens along the way?
Yeah, and I think there's always going to be a subset of students for whom reading is very difficult.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think we have to acknowledge that as well, for a vast variety of reasons. But I think you're right in that a lot of students enjoy it early on, and I think part of it is the culture. I think the culture of a school, the culture of a home. As one may imagine, my home is very reading friendly.
Sure.
Right?
Shocking.
Everyone, don't drop your coffee cup, right? Like, but I have tons of books. My husband is an avid reader, actually, as well. I am. My kids and I read together. We're very interested. I mean, it's a good thing to do at my house.
Yeah.
Right? It's encouraged. They see other adults in their life reading. It's always been a thing. I think schools can have good cultures of reading, and I think schools can have negative cultures of reading. I think that makes a big difference. Do people recommend books to each other? Are there opportunities for you to talk about what you're reading? I do have to give a shout out. My kids' school did a summer reading kind of send home sheets, and one of the things on there is asking them to read and review books for other kids. I think that's a great practice, right? Like, write a book down and 5 stars. What did you like about this? I hope they use those, and I hope they post them somewhere share with each other to get good book ideas, right? My girls will tell you, they have huge long lists of books that they can recommend to friends. That's a great, if you ever run into them on the street, engage them in conversation, right?
Seriously though, it's a powerful idea to
It
get
is.
kids to share with each other. Hey, I read this book and here's what I liked about it, and you should read this one too because, right?
Yes.
Like, oh man.
So I think culture has a lot to do with it. I think choice has a lot to do with it. I think as kids get older, there's a lot more structure around what they're reading, which we can get into this later, but I think there should be a balance between whole class reads and independent reading, but there has to be some independent reading, right? There has to be some element of choice. I also think we as English teachers, and I'm one of them, so I'm part of this, right? And I taught this way, right? We kill it with worksheets and with assignments and with chapters and pieces and quizzes and assessments, and it's not a whole thing, right? It's not a for the joy of discovering an idea as much as it is because, and we touched on this in our last episode, we need a grade in the grade book for right? How do you grade reading?
And that's such a great question that you raised because then is this about that again, right? Like what are we trying to achieve?
So I think that kills the love. At the high school level, some of the curriculum that we ask students to read in English class, and again, I'm guilty of this, right? I taught American Lit. Well, I have yet to find a 17-year-old student who is enamored with Thoreau, right?
Also shocking.
I worked hard to sell it, right?
Right.
And I tried to make connections, but it's not accessible. And I'm not saying not to teach Thoreau. I think there are ways to teach Thoreau, but I also think you need to scaffold it. These kids haven't picked up a book on their own in how many years, and then we put Thoreau in front of them, right?
Yeah.
And
Great starting place.
And so they're, without a lot of help in scaffolding, it becomes, and then they just shut down. Right? So it's a lot easier to just disengage at that point.
Two things.
Those are some of my ideas about why.
So also as a recovering high school English teacher, I think about, so this, again, my own story is teaching in a school that had 75-minute blocks instead of 45-minute blocks. So first of all, there's a practical, hey, I got 75 minutes for this English class instead of 45 minutes. Like I got to get everything done in 45 minutes. So now you want to give time to read in a class. And I'm thinking as a teacher, right? How could I give? Well, that's how much? 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Well, now I'm down to 20, 25 minutes to teach. I can just feel the anxiety building in me of all the things I have to do in quotation marks in a year. Well, we made a decision as an English department with these 75-minute blocks and we would meet every other day, that the first 20 minutes in every English class in the high school, the first 20 minutes of every class was free reading. So we would say, we're going to give you time to do this. Now, I loved the idea. When we started that, we had what was known as accelerated reader as kind of guiding the books that you would pick and that you would be assessed on, with a quiz that nobody really knew the answers to.
You should see my face right now.
Yeah, totally.
You should see
totally
how he's cringing.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I got more familiar with accelerated reader, I just naturally started allowing students to find books that interested them, whether they were on accelerated reader or not. And we actually started doing things like maybe instead of taking a quiz, what would a book talk look like? Which was fascinating because now you actually have students talking about literature rather than just answering 10 questions that have nothing to do with anything. That just basically assessed content knowledge. But what I loved about it was, and I tried to give space there. So for some, it was reading a graphic novel. For others, it was reading Thoreau, right? Or it was reading. Sure. And it just basically said, read something you love. I can remember a student walking in with Calvin and Hobbes one day. If that's what you need today and that's where you're at. Because in the end, the goal for us was, we just want you to And you don't even have to love reading, just to enjoy it and read, to know that there are things out there that connect with you, whether that's Thoreau or Calvin and Hobbes, or reading a hockey encyclopedia, just something that you love.
I love that, just that sense of choice, and to normalize, like, hey, as long as you're reading, like, because I'm thinking of some of the kids that I taught in middle school over the years who were struggling readers, for whom 20 minutes of reading that would just about kill them for some of the kids I taught, right? And so if we could normalize that, hey, we're all going to spend time reading, but we're all reading what we want to read, and if it's going to be a hockey encyclopedia, okay, like whatever your thing is, just make that okay. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be quality literature every time, right?
Right, and I do think there's room for scaffolding to quality literature.
Well, right.
Right, and ways for teachers to encourage students to read outside of their comfort zones and to increase complexity, but there has to be a culture of reading in order for that to happen. And I also think there can be systems in place where we have a very dedicated 20-minute time that actually falls apart when the culture's not there and it's not scaffolded or there's not genuine accountability. And I also think kids can smell when we don't trust them to do what we're asking them to do, like with an accelerated reader test, right? And so then we're back to compliance versus actual choice. And those accelerated readers, they're tricky. Yeah. They're not looking for understanding the theme of a book. They're looking for did you understand this vocabulary word on page 7? Yeah. Right? Like,
friends, if you have
that's not what we want students to take away.
No. Friends, if you have accelerated reader at your school, I ask you to look at what the research says that does
and
for students.
Take the quizzes.
Yeah, and take the
on a book that you've read.
On a book that you've read. You know, just ask the question, like, why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah. And why don't we trust students to read for in different ways and be assessed differently.
Okay, I have a question, because I am not the English teacher in the room here too. And Abby, you a couple times have alluded to, like, how do we scaffold towards reading something? Can you tell me a little bit more about, like, what would that look like?
Right. So actually, something I talk about in my English methods class, which is when I teach our students here at Dort to become English teachers, it's the class they take. We have a text that talks a lot about the balance between whole class novels and independent reading. And so the idea of, and I wish I would have known about this when I taught high school. I always think I should go back, right? Yeah. But can we teach a reading skill, or something an interpretive skill, right? Or something as a whole class where we can use a book that we're all reading in common. And can we learn those things that we're focusing on derived from standards, right? We should be able to, like imagery, for example, right? Yep. So how does the author use imagery to communicate a message, right, in this book? So if we can focus on that in a whole class text, we can do that, we can work on it together, and then students can choose, maybe in a book club, maybe independently, a novel that also has some of those same elements, and practice those skills independently in those books. And so instead of just being in an English class a free-for-all student choice, maybe there is controlled choice, where we say we're working on this skill, here's the set of books from a wide range of interests and abilities, even reading levels, where we're all going to work on this skill that we just learned all together. Yeah. Right? So that's one way of thinking about scaffolding reading.
I love that, because I'm thinking immediately back to my American Lit class when I was in high school, and I had a masterful teacher, Greg Schertzma. I don't think you'd ever listen to the podcast, but thank you for being the teacher you were, okay? And we did that, right? We were reading early American literature, or, I read Moby Dick. I did not enjoy Moby Dick. We'll just name that, right? Yeah, and it was a slog, right? But like, he had a way of structuring the way we would talk about what we were learning about as we were reading the book, to help us see things that I never would have picked up on myself, right? And then to take that to read other novels later on in the course, where it was like, oh, okay, but we learned this when we read Moby Dick. And I could kind of think, so I'm reading something by James Michener, much more contemporary author, much later in the course. Oh, okay. And so when I'm reading Tales from the South Pacific, like, I can use some of those
even the way that authors use time, right?
Yeah.
Or flashbacks, or the difference between a limited first-person account versus an omniscient third-person account, and why would an author choose one or the other, and just thinking about things, because we're more seasoned about, as English teachers, right? We're more experienced in knowing why authors make those moves and being able to pick them out, and just kind of apprenticing students on, that's why, or that's maybe why they did this, or I didn't notice this connection before, right? And instilling some of that wonder so that they can discover that in books on their own.
And I just think I think then reading becomes different. Like you understand it. You understand it. Like, hey, maybe here's the reason behind it. You start noticing that. You start, and I think it empowers you actually as a reader, right? I think so much of there's all kinds of different struggles with reading, but I think one of the struggles is simply you're not sure. Yeah, like you're not sure why is the author doing what he's doing? Like I have no and I just think that the more you can help students scaffold and deepen their understanding, not just of the content, but even of how a story is structured. I just think you enjoy reading, just like when you watch a movie, right? The more you watch and you understand a director's, maybe a decision they make, it's like, it just opens up possibilities. And I think that's part of the work of when you're teaching reading is, understand the content and understand how to read. But also when you begin to understand the why behind it, I just think it opens up whole new worlds and you appreciate it in so many different ways. Dave, my question for you is, so you mentioned, hey, the why or the teacher behind that helped you understand that love of reading. How do you use reading, or like we talk about cross-curricularly, or can you just talk about that a little bit, about the importance of that?
Of drawing on literacy across the curriculum. So here again, I'm not any expert on this, but I had it's a silly example that comes to mind immediately for me when you asked that question. I liked teaching with picture books when I was a middle school science teacher.
Which is an excellent idea.
And I would do class read-alouds of picture books more often. And one of my very favorites, I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. When I was teaching the digestive system to 8th graders, I found a book called The Gas We Pass, The Story of Farts. And it's a picture book that explains what farts are, why do we fart, all of that. And the kids were just dying because I'm reading this picture book aloud to them. But I defy you, if you go find these kids, and they're 30 years old today, right? They will remember that we read that, and it caught them in a weird, wonderful way. And I think that kind of stuff matters too. Like, could I have used some kind of a science-related trade book, chapter book or something like that, and draw from that as a cross-curricular way to build interest? I think so. I think that there's something about story and narrative structures that draws kids in, and in a way that cold hard facts just won't ever do. So I wonder about that, right? Like I think that there's definitely, I guess it comes to the point that you were making too, Abby. It can be a both and here, right? There's a time to teach discrete skills and to help students learn how to do that kind of cognitive apprenticeship we were talking about. But then also opportunities for them to have a choice and a voice in what they're learning about and what they're taking away from it.
Content knowledge is actually really important in reading skills. Right?
Oh, yeah. Just to make sense of what you're reading.
Right, exactly. And so, you'll see some elementary schools who will cut out science or social studies to focus on reading, which is counterintuitive. Because in order to understand what you're reading, you need background knowledge. And taking out the content from whatever it is does nothing for your reading skills. Right? And so, it is a both and. You need content and you need the skills to read what you're doing. And so reading widely across subject areas, having those subjects, all of that matters to reading.
And I think for me the encouragement is we've referenced being English teachers, but I think teaching reading is not limited to English teachers. We are all, and that was the kind of the reason behind my question, Dave, is we all have a responsibility to teach reading and a love for reading. Just like we're all, as an English teacher, it doesn't make me not a science teacher or not caring about science. And how can science enhance the reading in my classroom? We have to support each other, and we have to, even though we're in a silo as an English teacher, that doesn't mean we shouldn't see ourselves as not social studies teachers or math teachers.
Well, it was one of my favorite examples of that. So when I was the tech director, my office was right off the library at our school. And when I'd have 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders in the library, they're there to pick out books and stuff. I would always come out of my office and talk to them about what books they're reading. Oh, you liked this one? Here, I got one for you.
Yeah.
And I could sit it, because I read a lot of kid lit and young adolescent lit, to just know what they were reading and to be able to give those kinds of recommendations. It's like, oh, I know that you love this topic in history. You should read this book, right? And to be able to put a book into kids' hands that way, and then to be able to follow up with them a week or so later and say, hey, how was that? Oh my goodness, Mr. Mulder, this is such a great story, right? And like, what a delightful thing that is to share a book with somebody else.
And that's the kind of culture you want.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you, not to put you on the spot, and Dave spoke a little to that. If you were to give one or two things, recommendations, a person comes up to you and says, we just need to change the culture around reading in our school. Like it can be better. Is there a couple things that come to mind that say, hey, even if they're little moves, just little things that a school or even in a classroom, I want to have a better culture of reading in my classroom. Is there a couple things that you'd say, here's a couple of small things you can do that might help?
Yeah, I think part of it, speaking to Dave, is have somebody who knows a lot of books, right?
Yeah.
And can connect kids with something and have that available, right? Have those freely available in the library, on the shelves of classrooms, accessible, know what's out there, be well read, be able to talk to kids and connect them with something that interests them, I think is huge. And then I'd say work on genuine, not coerced, not forced, like people who are excited about their own reading and somehow present that, right? I used to have coaches come in and talk about like something that they read,
Oh, yeah.
right? Or other well-known or, put somebody in front of them to talk about a book that might spark an interest in a student. Have students who have read something be willing to share, right? Word of mouth, right? Things that they've read, and give them genuine, authentic opportunities to do that where they're not being forced to for a grade, right? That kind of thing can catch on.
Friends, we know your time is valuable. I want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether this day, this week, this month, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. As you go into this week, we want to send you with this blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace, and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good week.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening.
Abby, one or two of your favorite books.
Oh, you can't ask me that.
Yeah.
No, I can't do it.
I'm coming back to you.